how does it look like when your students are getting sleep? How does it look like when they're not? What does it sound like? How does it impact the students? How does it impact the staff?
Yeah, sleep remains elusive for a lot of folks in this community. I think it is not just within our community. I think it's everywhere. This is a problem that lots of people face, figuring out how to get enough sleep and how to get enough quality sleep.
Yep.
When I think about how that looks with students, for example, I can tell when students have not been getting enough sleep, sometimes just by their mood. It's not unusual for kids who are not sleeping enough to be kind of cranky, kind of edgy. It's certainly more difficult for them to become engaged and stay engaged when they're in class.
Yep.
And I think that, and it's interesting because, I mean, it can show up in some of the most basic functions, like remembering what class you have next. I mean, your synapses just don't fire as effectively when you're not well rested. And knowing that adults have a lot of the same challenges, obviously, the questions that I ask, when I have a chance to do that. And I certainly know that teachers ask these questions, and I know that our counselors ask these questions too, is, part of this is about making sure that, the students are actually thinking about what they can control for in their own homes. Yep. To make it possible for them to shut things off and then shut themselves down, right? So they can get sleep at night. Some of our students live in houses that are they're just full of people. They might not have their own rooms, right? If you're sharing your room with other people, then you can't fully control sometimes when you can get, full darkness in there and quiet in there.
Yep.
Whereas for other kids in the school, they do have access to their own room and can control it themselves. But the thing is that just because they have their own rooms doesn't guarantee that they're actually going to turn off their social media. It doesn't mean they're going to put their phones away. It doesn't mean they're going to stop chatting or stop DMing or Snapchatting or whatever, right? So part of this is, part of this is in some ways has become the normal. But happily, I think, I really like being at a school that takes students' social and emotional lives very seriously, and where we do ask questions like this on a much more regular basis and take it seriously. But I will also tell you that, because we are 2 years into this pandemic now, or just about 2 years into this pandemic.
Yeah, we're just about to hit that marker.
Yeah, next month, right?
Yep.
So I know that all of us at some point or another have struggled with sleep, because part of what also gets in the way is anxiety and stress levels. And so the stressors that have come with the pandemic, and they wax and they wane, but they're also pretty persistent. Mm-hmm. That also has had that's definitely had an effect, and oftentimes a negative one. So yeah, I mean, we definitely see it, and we see it in ourselves as adults too, no question.
So before I ask you about yours, I think one of the things that I've realized in my own routine, and it's one thing that I really don't like, and I'm trying to improve on, is exactly what you mentioned, that the first thing I do when I wake up is paw at my phone, and then I'll check the time, and then the next thing I do is I unlock it, and the next thing I do is I'll get on one social media or another, and so you make a really good point that it's normal. No one, if I was to say that to my peers, they would be like, oh, of course, me too. How do you set that boundary for yourself? And then how should students think about splitting? There's positive sides to technology and there are not positive sides to technology. In terms of sleep, how does that affect you?
So I'm not great at this, honestly. My routine, my going to bed routine includes, finishing out the last game left on Words with Friends before I shut my phone off. So the last thing I see is this stupid little word game that I like to pretend is really, is really for smart people because I'm making words the whole time. But it's a video game, right, on my phone. So I think that what I've gotten better about doing as a head is actually setting some boundaries about at least electronic communications within our community during like every single day. So one of the best tools that I have found to help people keep this boundary is the schedule send function on Gmail. I did this the first time I really did this was at King when the pandemic hit, because since everybody was online and not in person anymore, people were going nuts, like emailing at all hours of the night and expecting responses because everybody was stressed. And nobody could see each other anymore, right? Nobody was present for each other physically. So I'd set the boundary there. And then we did actually the same thing together here at Mid-Penn when I started this last summer, because the teachers here had also reported that parents were really like kind of like just going out of bounds when it came to just the volume of communications and the urgency that parents felt to get responses right away. So what we decided is that it was reasonable for like faculty and staff, we say Staffulty here, it's reasonable for Staffulty to be online, and be like answering emails kind of normally between about 8:30 in the morning until about 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night. And so after 6 o'clock, none of us is supposed to send anybody within the community an email that they would see that night. And the reason why is because I actually think that it is important for us as a school institutionally to send the message that we don't expect people to be on their computers all night. Now, do people work at night? Sure they do. But just that one little boundary that I've also asked parents to respect, that one little boundary is a signal that we're taking this seriously. And actually, my colleagues have said that parents have been really good about respecting that. And they've done a really good job of using schedule send on emails that they might be working on at night, but they won't receive, but nobody will receive it until the following morning, right? Yep. So it's like a little bit of a respite, a little bit of a boundary. And I do that too, because in my job, I oftentimes don't have the time to respond to emails during the day. A lot of times I don't get to them until after dinner. But then I can work a lot more easily and, like without feeling a time pressure on it, because I just get it done before I go to bed. But I also know I'm not bothering anybody when I send out an email or a response.
That makes sense.
It's little stuff like that actually does make a difference. And I'm the kind of person that like if I still see the red dot on my mail app on my phone before I go to bed, it drives me nuts. So I just I don't want a red dot. As long as the red dot is not there and I feel like I responded to everything and I'm like kind of cleaned up, then I actually do feel good about closing my computer and starting to shut down.
Absolutely.
But I have another friend because I do I'm on the faculty of the Institute for New Heads. And okay, so that's how I do it. But my friend Tony, who is also on the faculty, he's the guy who says, you know what, at 6 o'clock, I just stop. I don't care about a red dot. I just stop at 6. That's my boundary. So there's ways to do it. But I think like I said, that boundary that we created here does seem to be working. I mean, sometimes people forget, but it's not a big deal.
That makes sense. Does this also apply to the students? And then as another quick prep before that, so recently, as I mentioned earlier, I have been talking to Vistamar, old high school, and a lot of the research that we've done in the past has been with college students. And so part of understanding high schoolers is also understanding something you said earlier, that there are some things out of their control that a college student might have more opportunity. So they might just have more free time or a room to themselves. And so one of the things that became clear for us in this mission of time management, particularly for high school students, is the idea of it's a skill and it's something that you have to like practice. And it's okay if in 9th grade you're like, you're getting your feet wet, and then senior year, maybe you're still not perfect, but the goal is to prepare you for that long term. So that being said, how has this change affected the students, or like the culture about, all right, here's a boundary, respect it, go be a person?
Yeah, well, it's funny because this probably will not surprise you. The email boundary ends up de facto being for adults because teenagers don't do email. Like
Oh,
we have to harangue them to even check their emails. So it's, in some ways, it's a little bit of a moot point, right? But at the same time, I will say that again, like one of the many things I really love about this school is that, we're a school that works very, very closely with each individual student, because, we do have, like, we have students here. Many of our students have learning differences, for example. Many students here, have anxiety, and the ways that their anxiety manifests is going to be different and all that. So they come here because they want to go to real high school, because we are a real high school. We've got clubs and, sports and all the rest of it, along with what you would expect in a high school curriculum. What's different about us is the levels of support that we give kids. And so because it's part of our ethos to teach, to help each student learn, to teach them to some extent, but also just to help them learn what does work for them when it comes to getting homework done, when it comes to keeping up with teachers and all that. That's actually part of the philosophy here. So what's nice about that is that, they are normal teenagers in the sense that, like, they all have phones and they're all on social media, right? So, and we know that. And at the same time, I think that because there's such a focus for us on in working with them to keep themselves healthy in body and mind and soul, that it's a little bit easier to have these conversations here, because it doesn't seem like a one-off. In other high schools, sometimes it's like, we talk about all this stuff and then we say, oh, and by the way, make sure you get some sleep. Whereas here, sleep and homework habits and healthy habits in general are part of the more regular conversations that we have.
That makes sense. And I guess that's a really good transition to my next question, which would be generally about, like, academics. What is I guess it's two questions. One, generally speaking, like, what is the routine of a typical mid-pen student, like from, I guess, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and then maybe the extracurriculars then after? And also, alongside that, do you think your students have a good handle of when they're most productive during the day?
That's a really, that last question is a really good one, and I'm not sure I have a good answer for it. Because I do wonder. I'm about to start what's called entry conversations, where I meet with groups of students to get their take on the school. That's actually something that I want to ask them about, is how the rhythm of the day is for them. Generally speaking, our students like the schedule that we have. So we had, like, they would take, there are 5 class periods a day, but there are 6 periods in the schedule. So, the
rotates,
classes roll and rotate and all that, which is good. They don't rotate as much as they do in other schedules, because it's easier to accommodate some of the part-time teachers that we have. But still, the kids don't always have the same class at the same time every day. And so one of the things that I'm always curious to know in schedules like that is the extent to which they notice that they are different in those classes. And actually, I wonder if they notice that the teachers are different in those classes depending on what day and what time they have them, right? Because I know that from having taught in rolling schedules before, that, like, I was definitely a different teacher at like 8:30 a.m. than I was at 1:30 p.m.
Yep.
And I was just in a different state of mind, right? And and I had already had coffee by that point in the afternoon, and probably just had lunch. So it's like all of those things matter. And I haven't had those conversations yet with the kids here. But what I have heard so far, just kind of from being around and then hearing from their parents too, the kids actually like the schedule. Part of the reason why is because we do start late here. Our first class starts at 9:30 in the morning.
Following research.
I know, right? Yeah, like, who knew? I know, like, everybody knows that that's when teenagers start to learn better, right? I love being at a school that actually practices that. I mean, Vistamar wasn't far off. I mean, our first class started at almost 9 o'clock, right?
Something like that. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we started with morning meeting, but that was a long runway into the day, right? It was an easy runway. So so they definitely like the late start. We're done like at about 3:10 in the afternoon, so it's a reasonable day.
6 hours.
And I think that because we built in some longer passing periods here and there, and because we have like a night, like about like a 40-minute lunch plus a core, which is advising in the middle of the day. It feels very humane. you know,
Yeah.
and doable. And I think that, and so like when I look around the halls, for example, during passing periods, like kids are not, I don't see like people freaking out and rushing a lot. It seems to actually, it seems to encourage at least like some healthy rhythms for everybody during the day. Now, obviously different kids are going to experience it differently, and I'll get more information on that soon, but yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So thinking about DemiTool again, one of the things that's key for us is this, like seeing your time and visualizing. And so of course, the first tool that we built was a calendar.
Yeah.
And so then now thinking about the students' time, assuming they went to sleep at midnight, because it's just the easiest, like
Probably. Yeah.
0 to 9 would be the 9 hours of sleep that high schoolers should be getting. Then you have 30
Right.
minutes to get to campus. Then you're there for about 6-ish hours with, as you mentioned, enough breathing space and food time so that it seems like there's enough time for the students to be productive. Because one of the things that comes to mind for us is, particularly on the academics and more so when they go home, how do students understand that maybe working 3 hours on a project or a homework assignment isn't the best use of time? Stop at like 1.5, rest the other 1.5. And so if the culture for Mid-Pen is already just even starting at 9:30 gives it, like, if I was a student, I wouldn't be complaining.
Yeah, no, we never hear any complaints about the start time. That's for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because, yeah, and especially because traffic in the Bay Area has gotten to be, it's in many ways just as bad as LA in the last 10 years or so, and maybe even a little bit worse because the freeways here are not quite as big.
Oh, sure.
So the pressure is even more. I know that families definitely appreciate it. We do have kids who come from all over the Bay Area too. So a lot of them take public transportation, like the trains, and it reduces the stress of commuting, and if you come in less stressed from a commute, then you're more likely to be engaged when you get into class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess also on that note, do you notice a difference between your freshmen and the seniors in terms of that? From just that statement you made, it sounds like the school respects everyone's time, all of the community, the parents, the students, the teachers. So how is that? Yeah. So how is that growth, or can you like see the growth within the grades of their own time management or how they think of their time?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's probably not surprising to hear that the seniors kind of have it a little bit more going on than the freshmen do, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The thing is that we're a pretty small community too. I think we have 142 kids in the school, and so this is also a school where the grades mix together all the time, very naturally. Vistamar was like that too. It's one of the things I loved about Vistamar is that it wasn't unusual for a senior to be friends with a sophomore, like really friends. Like that happened all the time. And so I think in a lot of ways, because of just the close proximity that all the kids have to each other, the seniors probably do more, at least informal modeling of how to make things work in this system than might happen in another school, which I love. But the other interesting thing too is that, like I said, we have a very high percentage of kids here. About 70% of our students at this school have some kind of a documented learning difference. And of course, learning difference has nothing to do with how smart you are. It just has to do with how you learn.
Yep.
And so, because a lot of those kids some of those kids have come from schools that actually are designed for kids with learning differences. So there's one school just up the road from here in Belmont called Charles Armstrong School that is a school for kids with learning differences. So those kids will come into the school pretty much ready to make a transition because they've been taught how to make the transition already because that was the purpose of that school. For kids who have come from their local public schools, though, sometimes they might have different challenges when they come in as freshmen trying to figure out what it is to be in a high school schedule, especially if they were at a public school that wasn't great at meeting their needs, right?
Yes.
And then we have kids who come from other private schools that are really teeny tiny schools where it's more one-on-one support. And then when they come here, because we're not a one-to-one school like that with kids, I mean, like I said, like this is a real high school. Sometimes those kids have a really hard time navigating and figuring out, wait, where do I go next? And it takes them a lot longer to develop a rhythm. So there's no one way that this ever happens, right?
Mhm.
But because we teach freshmen every year, we're ready for it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep.
So I think that that's the key, right? I mean, if we can't be, nobody's ever surprised that ninth graders, get discombobulated. It's their job to get discombobulated. And
Yeah.
it's our job to recombobulate them, you know? So
Absolutely. From our perspective, and then the transition to the little side question. So the question is, do your students self-reflect, and if so, how? And then just a little bit of context. One of the things with talking to teachers at Vistamar is there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's a level of like skill and maturity required for that self-reflection. And then for DemiTool's perspective, it's not that we want people writing a diary every single day and like record everything. It's more that from a time standpoint, if we understand that you're sleeping enough, or you set that time first, right? That I want to sleep the 9 hours, cool. And then by the end of the day, you check in and say, oh, today I only got 6 hours of sleep and I was rushing from class to class. And afterwards I had to practice at rehearsal. And then I just exhausted. Like what we want to just show you is like some really nice looking charts that give you that information very quickly so that you can say to yourself, oh, how do I make change in my own life? What is working? What is not working?
Yeah. So I that's one of the things that really intrigued me when you first described this to me, is this ability to visualize it, because I do think that for, I think that for all of our kids, but I'm like this too. Like I actually need visuals a lot of times, because my mind's eye is not super skilled. Like for example, when I got here this summer and they were talking about the building that we hope to build in the next year or two, they were describing it beautifully, but I was like, do you have a drawing of this? I have no idea really what you're talking about. Like I can't see it until you show it to me. And then once I saw it, I'm like, oh, now that looks great. So I find the same thing. One of the things I learned a long time ago as a high school teacher, I learned this from one of the learning specialists I work with, is that like when I was writing notes on my whiteboard for the students, I learned that certainly for kids with learning differences, but actually it's better for everybody. Every time like I was writing something that had to do with one concept, I would use one color. But when I was writing something about the next concept or topic, I used a different color. So I usually had like all these different colors all over the board. And the reason why is because it was easier for kids to differentiate between things. Because if you write it like all in black ink, it just like, it can look like a big blob and then you don't get anything out of it, right? And I think, and so, and it was one of those things that I started doing. I'm like, God, that's genius. Like, why did I never think of that before? And the learning specialist was like, well, because nobody never ever told you. It's fine. Like this is how you learn.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that when I look at my Google Calendar, I have it all color coded. And it's the same concept, right? So like for me, I always wonder, like, if I went and took, some kind of, psych ed test right now to see if I had differences, I'm sure I probably have some, right? Probably ADD and lots of other things too. But it's an interesting thing that, the visual itself can help you to understand what's going on a lot better than just reading the text. That like text and visuals together can be really powerful.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think what's interesting about it, and what I'm really intrigued by in terms of what you're developing is, and especially because of what you just said, is that if you've got the right visual and you can really kind of see it like first of all, almost as like one unit, like the gestalt of it all, but then also be able to drill down on individual pieces of your day or pieces of the visual itself. I feel like that you're in a much better position to be able to make meaning out of it.
Absolutely.
Right? And the whole reason behind this is to make meaning out of it so you can make meaningful change if you need to.
Yeah. And then I'll reiterate the point that it is a skill and it requires some level of maturity. And the reason I say that is because the way that DemiTool functions and the way that we want to help people think about their lives is first think about your needs. So I'll keep saying it. Sleep is a big one. You have to be eating. There's a social side of like family and friends. getting enough movement in the day, you know, for your body.
Yep.
That's step one. Step one is how do we help students think about those parts of their life? Step two is, okay, now that we have an understanding of like, I need these things, what are my goals? And so my goal is to go to college or to, you know, for me, high school is like score a lot of goals for soccer. Afterwards, we can think about tasks, you know, I have to brush my teeth, I have to walk the dog. These are things that I just have to do during the day. And then the last one is people. So who are the people in my life with like that I want to keep in touch with, the ones that are helping me become myself and grow into this person that I want to become. And so when you talk about this like big picture, one of the things that was challenging for us, but we feel that we have a really good answer for it now, is there's so much of life there. No one's actually made like a model of life because it's really difficult. That said, we have a model of life and we think that we've made it simple enough so that if you go about your day, if you go about your week, your month, and your year, that you can start pinpointing, oh, okay, like my food bar is low on Tuesdays, and that's because I have to rush because I have to get the bus. And oh, okay, so then either I wake up a little earlier or I bring a snack with me. There's some change that you can do with your life there. But if you're stressed all the time and if you're busy, you're more likely to miss those things and constantly be at that low energy level.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's noticing, right? I mean, I know everybody talks about mindfulness, which is a good thing. I'm glad people are talking about mindfulness. But that is really kind of a big piece of it. It's about noticing your breath. Like the most basic thing, the most basic part of you is your breathing. That's what keeps you alive. And yet we go about our days and never really think about it unless we make time to think about it. And so like what you're describing as like as a way to kind of chart all these places, all these pieces of your life in one place, I think that's really powerful because I mean, like I have an Apple Watch, you know, so it's tracking my movement and I got my, I closed my exercise bar already today. Hooray. So, but then I also have my Fitness Pal. And when I think about it, like sometimes I input my food, sometimes I forget, I don't know, but like it's all scattered right now. Right. So the idea that students actually might have the opportunity to have kind of a one-stop shop on that, I actually think that's pretty powerful.
We do too. I guess now I want to ask about social life and post-school time. So how do I guess, are your students purposeful about making time for family, for friends? And I guess we talked a little bit about earlier, how does technology and screen time play into that? Because maybe they go too far, or where are those boundaries for them?
Yeah, honestly, I am guessing that the students at my school are very similar, if not exactly the same in some cases, as students at other schools when it comes to that. I think that I think that just about every teenager, it's certainly in the country, definitely in this, I mean, we're in Silicon Valley, so of course, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I think students live a lot of their lives online. They just do. And there isn't much that, part of this is because they are teenagers too, right? I mean, prefrontal cortexes are not fully developed yet. There's, decision-making can be a little dicey sometimes.
Yep.
That's how they're wired to be. That is how they're wired to be. And so, this is where, of course, I get pretty upset sometimes with social media folks who very intentionally leverage the teenage brain in ways that are, can be really unhealthy. I mean, we all know that. But yeah, I do think that makes a huge impact on their time, and it can take a real toll on their time. It certainly can take a toll on their relationships with each other. It certainly can take a toll just on their own self-image and mental health. So yeah, all of that stuff is true. It's all true. And so I think, what we try to focus on as much as possible is not, like, we'll just stop or, I mean, it's the reality of the world. Right. And I think that sometimes with adults, we have a tendency to say, well, then just don't do it. And that's just not tenable. Right?
No, it's not. Yep.
Totally ridiculous. So I think really, the focus here usually is on developing healthy habits in whatever forum we're talking about. So if we're talking about social media, like what are healthy ways to use social media? You know, we're a school that really values kindness, for example. And you know, social media is not always known for, you know, for providing kind faces, I'll just say, you
Fair
know,
enough,
so
yeah.
yeah, you know, but I also think that in a lot of ways, you know, the same way that like, when I took driver's training as a teenager, they taught me defensive driving. In some
Mhm.
ways, there's also some space for us to talk about like defensive social media habits
Yes.
and just protecting yourself, because you know the same desire to connect with people that can really draw you into social media because you're seeking those connections. You know, that's also what makes it so dangerous, because you know you can get pulled into something,
Yeah.
and then before you know it, you're just getting pummeled, sometimes
From
through no fault of your own, you know, from other users or whatever it is. So you know, and when you post stuff, you know, it's easy, it's always shareable in one way, shape, or form. And
yeah.
so, you know, part of this is trying to teach kids how to think about how they share themselves online in ways that I mean, obviously, you know, they're predators and all that when they have to keep themselves safe. But I'm even just thinking about, you know, we're like relationships with other teens and relationships with people who are actually, you know, who actually go to the same school as you do, who you're going to see every day.
Yeah.
You know, how do you keep yourself safe, and how do you keep yourself sane on platforms that are not necessarily designed to do that?
Yeah. And then so
You know?
from one of our perspectives, we're building a digital tool. It's software. And so, of course, some of the question is, how do we build something that isn't like all those things that you mentioned? We are not, for example, trying to take anyone's data and sell it. And that's not the game that we're trying to play. The game we're trying to play is, in an ideal future world, every family has a DemiTool, because then from at least one person can manage people's time or just check in on everyone. And then
Yeah.
furthermore, from a like school community standpoint, you bring up a really good point of what are those interactions between like the community, because maybe someone's bugging me across the country. All right, like I can shut off my phone, but if I have to see this person in class next day, like it's a different form of communication and relationship and
Yeah.
just consequences.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I think that especially, you know, for students who I've known over the years who do struggle, you know, like struggle with their self-esteem, you know, struggle with anxiety, things like that, which is so many kids. I mean, it's
It's
you know,
part of being
everybody
a
does
kid.
just,
Yeah.
part of it is just being a kid. And then for some kids, like it's clinical, and then it's even more important that, you know, that we're teaching them how to take care of themselves, right? But yeah, I think that, you know, what's interesting again in a school like mine is that, you know, because this is a place where a lot of kids who come here never really liked school until they got here, because it is a really good place. Because kids actually really are good to each other here. And it's, again, like it just reminds me so much of Vistamar in that sense, right? It's like the kids are the ones who are like, yeah, you can't do that here. Like, that's not cool, you
Yep.
know? So the thing is that even when kids like step out of bounds on social media, and of course that's off campus stuff, it oftentimes does come to us pretty quickly, not because like we had like now that means that kids are busted. It actually, like, our approach to this is like, all right, so let's talk about what this is now, like how this is now affecting all of us here at school, because you know, because we have relationships here. The relationships are the most important thing that we do here. And so, you know, now let's talk and let's see how we might be able to help you fix this.
Yeah, starting from that human compassion side of things.
Yeah. Compassion is a word we use around here a lot. I mean, it doesn't mean we don't have any boundaries, because we definitely have boundaries, you know,
Yeah.
and there are consequences for, you know, for things that happen sometimes. But generally speaking, we have a community where kids actually do look out for each other. And, you know, and when somebody is really kind of going out of bounds, even if it's off campus and online, we oftentimes hear about it and then get to, well, we get an opportunity then to be in conversation and in relationship with the kids who are affected.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, which is good.
If I could borrow the compassion word for a second, one of the things talking to my fellow co-founder Deep, one of DemiTool was built at a time when we were stressed, depressed, anxious, just lots of responsibilities. This is the life of a grad student. And so with that being said, there are two real key takes from his perspective that I'm trying to like adopt for myself. The first one from a software standpoint is iteration, in that, you know, the first thing you make is going to be not great. I can use some other words.
Yeah. Got it.
Yep. And then, you know, it gets a little better. You talk to a few more people and it gets a little bit better. And it's like, oh, now it's good. Now it's great. Now it's amazing, so forth. And then the second one is on this compassion idea of, particularly from like a time management standpoint, I think that one of the things that we will come across is, or one of our big challenges is, right, we're building this tool that we think can be very helpful to people. Now they have to use it. And in that using it like particularly maybe that first week, having compassion for yourself in that, you know, I am using DemiTool in my day-to-day life, and I use it to check into my sleep and then check into my health. And then maybe one day I forget my sleep, and it's not about the next day saying to myself, you know, you can't keep a streak or you're just not good at this. It's okay, like I missed a day, that's fine. How can I change today? And so that mentality of caring for myself and iterating on that care for myself are two things that I'm trying to take and ideally can share with any of our future users.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think that, so that's one of the things that, so remember at Vistamar, like at morning meetings, you know, Stephanie Knudsen had her sign off and it was go learn something, right?
Oh,
so
yes, I remember.
Yeah. So, and when she wasn't there, like I would sign off, and I didn't, because that was her line. I had another one, and I think my line there was be good to each other. So here, when I sign off at community meetings, my sign off is be good to yourself and be good to each other. So it's the both and, right?
Yeah.
And I think like what I really like about what you're saying is that there's a sense in which using a tool like this actually encourages you to be good to yourself, right? I mean, first of all, just like learning how to pay attention to your own patterns and noticing what happens when you choose to do certain things. Or actually unconsciously just do them, because both of those things are important. That's actually a way of being good to yourself, because you're curious enough about your own patterns that, you know, you actually stand a chance of improving them. But it also hopefully, and I mean, I don't know enough obviously about the tool itself to know how this would happen, but it sounds like there's some really good possibilities also for developing compassion for yourself, right? So rather than beating yourself up, like you said, like, I mean, I still have a tendency to do this too. Like the other day, my partner, his name is Campbell, he like his sister sent him it was like these toffee coated, chocolate coated macadamia nuts or something. I think they went to Hawaii. And so I had one, and then before I knew it, I had 9 more. So and then I was like, so, which I do sometimes, like it's sugar, right? I mean, scientists have told us for a long time now that sugar is actually more addictive than cocaine. I'm absolutely positive that is true.
Ooh.
So, I believe it. I absolutely believe it. So the thing is that, so intellectually, I know that I had a moment, and it is what it is, right? So intellectually, I know I should just say, all right, well then tomorrow's a new day, and tomorrow let's pack the lunch now and make sure it's good and whatever. But I still have a tendency to beat myself up over that stuff, because I feel like I should be better at this by now. You know, like I just turned 53 today. I'm like, I should be better at this. Why am I so binging like when I'm like faced with chocolate? And so I'm getting better at not doing that. But I mean, I'm pretty new to mindfulness. I'm pretty new to like these kinds of this idea of self-care and all that. What makes me happy is that, well, it doesn't make me happy that my students have had to endure what they have through COVID, right? I mean, of course not. It's been horrible for everybody. And they've missed out on things that they won't ever really be able to get back.
Yeah.
But my hope is that because they are coming of age at a time when we've had no choice but to face the fact that we need to take good care of ourselves, I'm hopeful that like the place where I am now, where I'm less bad. I don't know if I'm good to myself sometimes, but at least I'm less bad to myself, right? Like I suck less at this now. So that's always a good thing. It's always my goal. I just want to suck less. But the nice thing is that because they are the age they are now, and because they are having these experiences, my hope is that they're going to be able to develop these habits maybe a little earlier than many of us in my age group did. And that actually, that if that's the case, I think that bodes well for a different kind of an adulthood. You know,
100% agree.
Which is the goal. I mean, I'm certainly interested in what kind of kids they are right now. I'm even more interested in what kind of adults they're going to be.
Mm.
That's how I always feel about stuff. You know, I mean, now is a fleeting moment, but they've got a long runway to hopefully some really great lives. And as tough as things are right now, and as tough it is to, I think, develop these habits, you know, whatever the tools are, including the one that you're developing, I just think that that's really powerful for them. And if that's some of the earliest work that they do on themselves, I think that's a pretty great thing.
Hopeful, yeah, absolutely. As a quick side note to my earlier comment of me sleeping and reaching at my phone, there are two things that I've done, and then one I didn't stick with and should come back to, and the other one is the baby step that you're talking about. I put my phone on the other side of the room, and now I have to go grab it. Okay, I haven't been consistent. I was doing it really well at the end of the year. I very poorly at the start of this one. So recently, the thing I was doing was I would open my phone, check, go on YouTube. Now I put music on as opposed to video, because at minimum, a little less, you know, just a little less.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And that's part of it too, right? Like every little thing matters. And I think that, and what I'm thinking about too, like as you're describing like the design of DemiTool, is that, again, that might be where some of the stories are for somebody, right? Like that one, like you can change that one little thing. Like just like, what if you just change that one little thing?
Yep.
Then what happens, right? And then you start to see that you actually can change things, and then things can snowball from there. So yeah. Yep. Sometimes it is just making sure that it's just the music and not the video.
And particularly because the moment I do video, I then jump to other apps. But if I only have my music app and my phone is still on do not disturb, then it'll just be music and it won't disturb me.
Yes. Yeah. Do not disturb is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It is.
I want to talk a little bit more about COVID, and now I want to talk about the adults, if you don't mind. How have your priorities and how have your Staffulty's priorities changed with COVID?
I think, wow. So I will say that in many ways, I think especially since I got here, this, again, I'm at a school that is so, it's just full of people who are so deeply committed to taking really good care of students. Mm-hmm. And again, for so many of our students, like they didn't love school until they came to our school, right? So that they came from really tough situations where, for lots of different reasons, they probably didn't get what they needed. And then they come to us and they're just surrounded by all these adults who are committed to doing exactly that. So that's a great thing. And that's, in some ways, it's that commitment that you can't really teach people. You can hire for it, but you can't teach it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and they can have expectations for it, but it's a mindset that they have. And so, I think that, the teachers, actually everybody, but I think especially for the teachers at the school, they were teaching remotely for such a long time. The school that I came from in Connecticut was we were on lockdown, I think, when everybody else was on lockdown, right? Starting in March of 2020, March of 2020.
Yep.
Yeah. And into that summer and all that. But then, last year we were open the entire year for instruction. And while we had some, there were some cases in school and some people had to quarantine sometimes and all that, school was open for the entire year. And we did a really good job with that. and it was really hard on the teachers. And we knew it was better than the alternative, which was being remote.
Yeah.
At this school, for lots of different reasons, this school actually was remote for the majority of last year. And so it really wore down the faculty in particular, because teaching online is really hard. I mean, the worst is when you do the hybrid model, where some kids are at home and then some kids are in your classroom. Like nobody wins on that one at all. And, there are ways to teach pretty well online, but it's not the same,
Yep.
and it's differently draining. So I think that since I came here in particular, it's been my focus has been on doing things like creating some boundaries, right? Like those time boundaries.
You mentioned.
Trying to be as explicit as I can about what I expect people to do and also what I don't expect them to do. Trying to looking for, like, one of my colleagues on the administrative team, we just call ourselves the A team. One of my colleagues on the A team.
That's fun.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, we're fighting over like who gets to be Mr. T, right? So but like the way he put it is that like our job right now as administrators and leaders in the school is to be relentlessly supportive of teachers. That's really what we do. So, this is a time when I feel like, I keep reading all these stories about how parents keep getting angry at teachers who are nervous about being in classrooms during COVID. And I understand it, but man, it makes me sad. And sometimes it makes me mad, teachers have been on the front lines throughout this entire pandemic.
Yeah.
And the stress is real. And so, because we're a small community and because there's a lot that I can control for here, it's important that the teachers know that I know that the stress is real. And they know I know that because I keep saying it, there have been times when, like I've had people actually like in a Staffulty meeting, just like verbalize to somebody next to them, like, okay, what are you doing that has nothing to do with school that's helping to fill your tank even just a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
If you can't come up with something, then your job is to come up with something and go do it this weekend, because you have to. Like, you've got to do something good for yourself. It cannot always be just about school. So, I think that the challenge is that this is everybody's job, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody has a job to do, and we are professionals, and our students come here expecting to be taught and taken care of and everything. Like, of course, like it's such a duh, right? And so I think that the challenge right now for somebody in a position like mine is, how do I effectively kind of hold my colleagues in a sense, like metaphorically hold them in a place where they feel seen, they feel heard, where they get to exercise a really good amount of discretion over how they use their time in the classroom and what they're teaching and all that, mm-hmm. so that they feel empowered and they don't feel like micromanaged and downtrodden. While at the same time making sure that I've also got like clear expectations for everybody, and I am asking people to meet those expectations and to be good at their jobs. And, depending on like what the latest numbers are, or the latest guidance, or like what do we have to like change the kind of mask we wear again, or like how many, like we just got 20 false positives on antigen. I mean, like it's all this stuff. And this last month was super stressful because it was just all coming down the whole time, right? There were, I mean, because a lot of things were happening, we did have an issue where we were doing some antigen testing and we had 20 positive cases. But then by like a couple of days later, we were supposed to have testing, and then our testing company didn't show up. It was a mess. And so we, like on a baseline, we actually had to go remote. We knew that because it was because we couldn't test people. So that was an easy thing to say. But what I also saw was that between Monday last week and Wednesday of last week, the anxiety level in this building shot up. I could feel it. I could hear it. I mean, you can almost smell it. It sounds strange to say that, but it was so palpable because it was like a layer cake of stressors that just kept coming at us. And so what we ended up deciding, I work with it, we have a COVID task force, and we talked about this with them too. But when we talked to them, we said, look, here's the deal. Yes, the faculty are stressing out because now they really don't feel safe, because we've done a great job of keeping people safe all through the first semester, like a really good job. I was super proud of us. And part of the reason why they're feeling so stressed is because their students are getting stressed out and their anxiety is going through the roof. So as they try to take care of the students, their own anxiety is increasing too. And so we actually think that we should take Thursday and Friday off as mental health days, because everybody is so stressed out. And then we'll do remote learning on Monday and Tuesday, and we'll be back on Wednesday. And the COVID task force was fully in support of it. I mean, like, trustees are on that committee, have a couple of nurses on that committee, and they were for it, because sometimes you just got to take a break. And so, yeah, I mean, and there are some parents who are really unhappy with this, because their thing is like, stay in school no matter what. I'm like, you know what? Generally speaking, I usually agree with that, but this was unusual.
And this is a global pandemic year too.
This is, and that's the thing. Every time we take care of teachers, we're taking care of students.
Yes, 100%.
But I think a lot of times schools that say they are student-centered make the mistake of prioritizing their colleagues, because it's actually the colleagues who make that possible, especially the teacher. So, but again, like there's got to be balance in there too. Like, yeah, like there's also accountability. Like, you're also accountable for doing your job.
Yep.
And I also need you to take care of yourself. And so, like, how do I communicate that in ways that people actually believe me when I say it? It's sometimes I think I nail it, and sometimes I don't think I do.
I was in preparation for. No, I think you hit on a lot of really good points, and in preparation to this conversation, I was reading a little bit about like the school's bio, and one of the things is it says focus that the school wants experts and compassionate teachers.
Yes.
And the thought that came from that was also thinking about Vistamar, and like when I went to Kalamazoo College, there's, as you mentioned earlier, there's like an inherent want to serve the students and serve the community. Absolutely. And that support. Yeah. And so then what you're also saying, and it's just clicking in my head, why for us it makes sense to think about not just the students, but the staff and the parents. Everyone's goal is to help the students from all of the different angles. And if you think of it as like a machine, like if one gear isn't working, then you need to, add some oil. It can't just be, the steering wheel of the car. No, like the engine has to be moving, the tires have to be there. And so then now I also am empathizing a little bit with your situation of, okay, how do I get everyone to buy in? How do I get everyone to believe me? And then the actual proof, the execution of it, it's like, oh, okay. I'm guessing, how was the start of this week then, after those 2 days off or mental health days?
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I mean, when we came back to remote learning on Monday and Tuesday, like I said, and, and it went fine. I mean, the nice thing is that teachers do know how to do it now, which is good.
Yeah, that's true.
We haven't had to do it much this year yet, which is also good. But again, like we had to go remote for the second week of January, and then we had these 2 days this week. So that's more than any of us wanted for this entire year.
Sure. Yeah.
But we did it because it was necessary. And so, I do know that the teachers, like, for example, one of the things that was important to me is that, when all this stuff kind of what was going down on Wednesday and my stress levels were up pretty high too, as a result, the group of us who work on this stuff, we're all administrators. So we like to fix things. That's why you go into administration, like, fix it, right? Like, let's get this done. We're going to fix it. And so we did get together and we came up with a few different scenarios, but what we agreed was that we couldn't make any final decision until we actually heard from teachers. And so we called a special lunch meeting, and I'm like, and first said, okay, well, here's the deal. Here's what we know. Knowing this, here's how we're thinking we might approach this, but we haven't made a decision yet because we need to know how you are. That's
Yeah.
what's going to drive the decision making, right? So like we're ready to choose from some good plans. You tell me how you're doing first. And I was the one that was saying this, and they were amazing. I mean, we asked, and they told us how they were, and they were.
What?
I know, right? Well, and it was funny because at first I'm like, okay, that's good. They're telling us all this stuff, but later I heard from my colleagues who've been here for longer than I have. They're like, okay, usually they don't want to say anything because they're afraid that it's gonna make them look bad, right? So it seems like we're building a healthy culture where people can say, no, I'm really like, I need something. This is really stressing me out. Help me out here.
Mhm.
And people did. People were really honest. And then after they had a chance to meet with students, we also then had another meeting later that afternoon, and we're like, okay, so we really appreciate knowing where you are. That's driving a lot of this. Here's the second level of questions now that you've all met with your advisees. How are the students doing? And then we got all this information about how the students were doing, and we're like, okay, well then there it is. Now we know what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it. So, I mean, it would have been quicker for me to just say, all right, I know exactly what needs to be done, and then just did it. But giving people the space to actually ask for what they need, it's everything. Giving people the opportunity to feel heard by those who do make the final decisions, I think that's one of the most important things we can do. And,
Yeah.
And I'm really proud that like that's our approach, like and sometimes we blow it. Sometimes we make the decision too fast, and teachers are like, what, but so I think we're really as an A team, we're really conscious about reminding each other to get student and faculty voice in the room. So they're usually pretty good.
That's amazing. Two quick comments. The first one, DemiTool centric. So
Yeah.
Our main screen is called Overview, and the idea with Overview is like how are you doing? Like this is the first thing you can look at and say to yourself, oh, I am, this is where we have those first charts of I'm low on sleep, or I did get enough family time. And so in addition to that, one of our sidebars is called feeds, and the idea is, we've talked a little bit about social media. They're all just feeds. They're just a group of people together sharing information, and we wanted to capture that same idea, but not we're asking for all of your time and like look, but more so what's the critical information for a student. So it might be like their club or their class or their sports team or rehearsals. And so then you're making me realize that from like a top-down view, you as an administrator would want the like, all right, here's the information I need to push from the teacher / the information I need from them. And then like, here's the thing to the students and the information I need from them. And then as you mentioned, the second story is on being heard. I have a friend who is doing TFA in Chicago. And I don't know if you heard the news last month where they were like barred from going into their classrooms and teaching. My friend does not feel heard whatsoever. And when you also mentioned this earlier, healthcare and education are the two like big industries right now that are taking the hit for all of us as society. Man, so if I was a teacher right now and no one was listening to me, and I'm taking care of all these students, and maybe I'm doing remote and maybe I'm in class, it gets to be too much. And so from my perspective, I can already appreciate the A team. I can appreciate the parents, the trustees, the like actual teachers. The positivity brings about more positivity and more communication. And for us now, it's a question of how do we facilitate that through DemiTool?
Well, because it's funny because if you're saying that right now too, I'm just thinking like, I mean, there's no substitute for getting together and talking,
100%.
right? That is for sure. And at the same time, if I also had access to the things that might come out in a conversation, but access to them in data form from something like DemiTool, right? Like if I can get like a quick snapshot of what's going on to help to inform the questions that I ask people, for example, or, if somebody comes back to me and pushes on me and says, well, how do you really know that's what's going on? I can say, well, here's some data for you that is, that is quantitative in nature in some ways, but then here's the qualitative data that I have from the conversations, which actually reinforces what the quantitative data is saying. That's how I make the decision, right? Because people in school, I don't know, people always well, I don't know, I'm probably exaggerating here, but I hear a lot these days in schools about making data-driven decisions.
Sure, that is a popular phrase.
It is a popular phrase, and I am a fan of data-informed decisions. I don't think data should drive anything. I think the human needs to drive it. I think the data should inform it. And the thing is, a lot of times when people say that they love data, they tend to mean that they love quantitative data.
Yes, numbers. Yep.
And in a lot of ways, they don't even think of qualitative data as data, right? Because we think of data as numbers. And the thing is that it's really the marriage of the two that helps you tell a better story and helps you make more meaning out of what you're seeing and hearing. And so that's why a tool like this I think is essential for making good decisions, because you can see things in the aggregate, but then you can also disaggregate it, right? Yeah. And then there's the personal connection that comes with gathering some qualitative data from conversations that, again, like, it helps you test it, right? Like what are people saying? Like, how are people actually tracking things? Like, what do you see when they track it? But then how are they describing it? Like, what's going on there? Like, and like, to what extent is it aligned? To what extent is it seen? There's some dissonance in there. I'm not quite sure, but I feel like that's where the story comes out. And at the end of the day, I'm interested in that story, and I'm interested in the interpretations that we get to make when we have data like this,
All of those things make sense.
Yeah, I mean, in the moment, sometimes you just have to make a fast decision, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's yet another way that, that as leaders in particular, like, we're encouraged to be thoughtful, and to be responsive rather than reactive.
If you don't mind, I'm going to take that data-informed statement whenever I talk about DemiTool in the future.
Do it. Yeah, I think I certainly didn't make it up. But yeah, that's the one I used all the time. I mean, there's that. And then, like, whenever I hear people say, like, so how are you going to measure that? And I'm like, well, I don't really measure anything. I assess. That's different, because measure indicates that you can actually, quantify things, and you can't quantify everything. Some things. Yeah. So assessment is broad. We assess for things, and we assess things quantitatively and qualitatively. And that's what informs the good decisions that we make as a result. That's how it should be, at least.
You said it super well.
Aren't you glad we're recording it? I'm glad you're recording this, because I know that I could say that exactly the same way ever again.
We'll loop it at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess with that, thank you so much for the interview. I really appreciate your time, your insight, and I don't know if there's any like last minute messages, maybe something to Vistamar that I can like send them over.
Something for Vistamar. I think that so Vistamar was the first place that I actually ever heard the term sleep hygiene. Thank you, Dan Golden.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and it was funny because a lot of the things that we're talking about are things that I heard when I was a candidate for the head of school job, and I was observing an open house presentation by the life planning team. So when they talk about, like, when they would talk about things like thinking carefully about how you spend your time during the day, thinking about how you want to spend your time when you're an adult, thinking about where you need to get your sleep in, and what happens to you when you don't, and why it's important for all these other things. I learned that at Vistamar, because that was the founding ethos of the life planning program, and it stuck. And I realized that like, I need to be in schools that take that stuff seriously. Like, that's where I'm always gonna be at my best. Where it's not that thing that you get to when you have time. It's that thing that actually undergirds all of the things that you do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And as the product of that, for me, it feels really perfect to like come back to that. And as you mentioned, totally. I want all pieces to be heard and understood and like self-reflective, and that's how we get the long-term global citizens. Yeah, it also sounds like Peninsula is doing it really well as well, especially with
they do it really well here. We do it really well here.
There you go.
It's my we now. This is my we. It's nice. Really nice. But yeah, this and plus apparently I just really like small high schools that are in tilt-up warehouse buildings. So
that's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, also my jam, apparently. So.
Yeah. Well, there are weirder ones.
Yeah, I know, right? It's yeah, and it is. I laughed when I first got here because they said, "So this is it was a warehouse." I'm like, "Oh, really?" And like, yeah, it was. It was one of those tilt-up buildings. I'm like, a tilt-up warehouse building? You don't say. Like, I think we're going to get along just fine.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate you asking.